Hi, everybody. This is Corey Hill at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. I'd like to welcome all of you to our March Talks on Tuesday, Unpacking Our Biases in Early Intervention. I am delighted to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Jen Newton, who's going to introduce herself in just a little bit. I also want to let you all know we seem to be having a little bit of trouble with the phone lines. If you can all be sure that your phone is muted and also that your computer is muted, that would be very helpful. And so without further ado, Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Jen Newton. I'm an assistant professor now at St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm also a former early interventionist and inclusive early childhood educator, and I now prepare inclusive educators to partner with children and families in early childhood contexts. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. My heart is still very much in the EI community in Virginia, and I see a lot of friends here with us today on the webinar. Your participation today is key to a robust learning experience for all of us. So find your tools that Corey explained and described to you, get your fingers on the keys so you can participate in the chat, and let's do this together. In our time together today, we will begin by defining bias for the purpose of this webinar content, then connecting these biases to the evidence as well as the DEC recommended practices, which do guide best practices in our work. We will then unpack 3 specific biases we each likely hold: reading books, playing together, and schedules. Finally, we will determine next steps for broadening our views to implement family-centered practices. So let's get started. What do you think of when you think of biases in early intervention? What do you expect this webinar to be about? Type in chat what you think of when you hear the word bias in early intervention. So remember, you have to participate. Find those keys. What do you think of? Lack of cultural competence. Fairfax knows about cultural competence, I know. Race, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, preconceived ideas about a family, absolutely. Low income, the ways in which people's internalized stereotypes influence their perceptions. It's a very Laura Deport response to bias. I would agree with that. What else? Personal beliefs that your way is the right way. Unchallenged, unknown givens we have in our head that we accept as truth. The idea of truth, for sure. Judging others regarding parenting style, lifestyle, choices they make, absolutely, will be content we talk about today. Thanks, Shelby. Anything else? While bias can and absolutely is applied to our beliefs about specific groups of people, about cultural competence, about sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and race and religion, like Margaret said, as well as the unchallenged givens. I like that example, what we accept in our head, as Beth said, to accept as truth. Those are absolutely examples of bias. About parenting, about developmentally appropriate practice and how culture influences developmentally appropriate practice. But today when we say the word bias, we are referring to the beliefs that we hold as early interventionists about what is best for the engagement and development of young children. We are talking about the specific practices we believe to be best for supporting the development and inclusion of young children in their families. So today we're talking about our professional biases. It's a little bit of a shift from what we traditionally consider when we think about biases. So stick with me and let's do it together. On your screen, you'll see the DEC recommended practices for family-centered practices. We believe in family-centered practices as a field, and we support natural learning environments for promoting the best outcomes for young children and their families. We also have some deeply held beliefs about what is best for young children, derived from our professional expertise and our personal experiences as parents, aunts, sisters, siblings. That is why it's important for us to be reflective practitioners about how our own beliefs may be preventing us from implementing true family-centered practices with the families with whom we work. The Division of Early Childhood recommended practice is divided into 7 strands. They're listed on the screen. The recommended practices give us some rationale for doing this work of broadening our lens for implementing truly family-centered practice. The circled strands in the green are environment, family, instruction, and teaming and collaboration. These 4 strands include specific recommendations related to the content provided here today. So we have these recommended practices, but we also know that we also hold preconceived notions of good practice that support child development. These include things families should or should not do. We can't help it. It's what we know is best, and we aren't wrong about it. The research base supports these biases that we hold, and we are the professionals. So of course we operate from that perspective. Today we are not disputing that the biases presented here are best practice. Rather, we are asking you to consider in what ways these deeply held beliefs may be inhibiting your implementation of truly family-centered practices by bringing awareness of your own beliefs and judgments. In doing so, we hope to promote more avenues in your work with families for promoting successful strategies that are individualized and unique to meet families where they are. So let's get started unpacking these biases together. Remember, you have to participate, so find your thumbs up and let me know that you're ready. Give me a thumbs up to let me know that you're ready.
For those of you who may have joined after, the thumbs up is right under your name, and you will see an option in the drop-down box for approval or disapproval. It's the first of the 4 buttons that cross right under your name. Thanks.
Fairfax is ready. ITCBR is ready. I wonder BR, what is that, Corey? Where's BR?
It's the infant and toddler connection of the Blue Ridge in the Charlotte.
Blue Ridge. Blue Ridge. Beth is ready. Got to find your keys. Awesome. We're ready. I'm going to keep encouraging you to participate, so find your buttons. Okay, here's our first one. Reading books is important for children. How many of us believe it's important that children are read to? Use the hand raising feature to raise your hand if you believe it is important that children are read to.
Again, if you need help with the raise hand feature, it's the 3rd button over right under your name. It has a little hand, and you just click it to raise your hand. There you go. People are getting it.
So that's about half of us. Half of us believe that reading is important. Raise your hand if you believe reading books is important for young children. Yes, I think we can all agree, even if you're not raising your hand, and the research literature is very clear that reading to children early and often is critical to long-term literacy outcomes. As a field, we love books, and we love getting books into the hands of young children and their families. So we agree that reading books builds literacy, supports language development, and promotes social emotional engagement. So what strategies do we use to support families in reading to their young children? Type in chat some of the ways in which you support families in engaging in reading with their little ones. What strategies do you use to support families reading together? Take them to the library. Hi, Patty. Meet at the library. Encourage reading at bedtime. Model reading. Meet at yard sales. Margaret, I love that idea, getting books on the cheap. Help them sign up for the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. Help them get a library card, guest bus. Read anything that is in the home. Discuss topics interesting and important to the family. Farming, trains, reading to stuffed animals, or the stuffed animals read to the child. Pointing and naming. Chesapeake offers a story time for EI families at the library. Providing books to families through book baskets. Digital photo books, making their own books, making children characters in books. Makeup books relative to their interests. These are all ways in which we can support families using reading. So let's unpack this as a bias. What if families wouldn't ever really go to the library without our incentivizing it? Libraries can actually be intimidating. The process of getting a library card, which I see that some of you offer support with, checking out and returning books on time, which is a struggle in my family, I know. My husband, in fact, just discovered about 2 years ago that checking out books in the library is free. His mother was shocked at how lacking his knowledge was about public libraries, but he had never utilized one before and didn't see that as a place where he would go. What about families with limited literacy proficiency? Families who simply do not enjoy reading to toddlers. Reading to toddlers can be an acquired taste, right? When my girls were little, my husband began the evening routine of telling them a story before bed. He used the three of them as the main characters, although they were often some kind of animal. He created adventures, problems for them to solve, and always happy endings. But he never ever read books to them at bedtime. Sometimes the characters persisted over several nights, and sometimes the story was a one and done. And despite the richness of this experience, we received pushback on this routine from their teachers and our friends and family. People said, I mean, that's cool, but they need books too. Book knowledge is only one part of literacy. Environmental, print, alphabet knowledge, and vocabulary are also equally important to the development of literacy skills and can all be taught without sitting down to read a book with a squirmy little one. Supporting families to use the print all around us to bring literacy into their child's day, narrating, telling stories, using rich vocabulary are all ways of building literacy. And many of you provided those examples in the chat. Modeling, pointing and naming pictures. None of these things require books. So what's next? We unpacked this idea of reading. So give me a thumbs up if you're ready for the next one. Find your tools. There's like a little emoticon. Drop down to approval if you're ready to move on to the next one. To make sure you're with me. Fairfax is with me. Goochland, Heather. All right. Let's see what's next. Play is important. Use the polling tool to select yes or no if you believe that play is important for young children.
And again, if you need help with the polling feature, it is right under your name. There are 4 boxes. It's the box furthest to the right. In the lower right-hand corner, you will hit and get a drop down for yes or no.
Now we're getting our fingers on the keys. I like to see those yeses clicking in. All right, so yes, we all believe that play is important for young children. Play is the work of young children. It's how they learn about the world. So we all agree that play is important, but why? Why do we think that? Type in chat why you believe parents playing with their child is important for young children's development. Why do we believe this? What is it about play that we value? It builds relationships. I like your participation, Shelby County. Learn through play, interaction and bonding, relationships, language development, creates a positive relationship with the parent, exploration of the environment, imagination, problem solving, socialization, relationships, communication. Harnesses children's deep affect as it connects with their bodies and growth in all domains. Motor skills, Rhonda, yes. Interactions, problem solving, and engagement. These are all really great reasons for us to encourage families to engage in play. Find the pointer tool, remember on that sidebar from the vertical toolbar to make your selection. Just indicate which of these two pictures show play in the way that we traditionally consider floor play. Do either of these pictures look more traditionally like floor play to you?
And Jeannie has
for the vertical toolbar.
Oh, there you go. Yes, Jeannie has typed the directions. Look for the vertical toolbar on the left side of the screen and click on the box with the starburst, and you can find your pointer. You will get an arm that extends out, and you can use your pointer. There you go.
So it looks like we are in agreement that the picture with the Duplos maybe is more traditional play. Scholars define play as having the following characteristics. Play must be intrinsically motivated. You must be free to play. You don't know the outcome of play. It is outside your ordinary life, which is my favorite characteristic, and it must be fun. Alternatively, playfulness, as demonstrated in the other picture with peekaboo, is not something we do, but rather something we are. Playfulness is a state of being playful and interacting with others. As adults, given the definition of true play, we can see why play is not necessarily natural or honestly even appealing to us. However, engaging in playfulness with young children is natural and critical to social emotional development. Families do not tend to play in the way we may consider floor play with toys, but are much more often playful in their interactions and engagements with each other. Corey, can you tell us the story about the dad and his going to work routine?
Sure. I was on a visit observing a student with an early interventionist, and this family did not have a lot of toys, and the mother was very clear to say that she didn't like to be on the floor, that was uncomfortable, and so the early interventionist and the student were sort of struggling. What is this family's everyday routine? How do they engage with the child? And about that time, the dad walked in, and he was getting ready to go to work for the swing shift. And he scooped the little girl up, and he held her up near their ceiling fan and their light where the cord was hanging down. And he looked at me and he said, "We play this game every day before I go to work." And they swatted at the cord hanging down, and they turned the light on and off. And the dad talked to the little girl, and she giggled, and he said, "This is how she knows we're going to work. I'm going to work." And throughout the whole conversation, he was carrying on a dialogue, "Daddy's going to work, Daddy's going bye-bye." When we stepped back, we talked about the playfulness this family, this dad, had automatically engaged. It cued the child to a routine. It cued to coming and going, and Dad's going to be back. And the whole time it was such a joyful interaction between the dad and his daughter.
Thank you, Corey. That's a great example. Thank you, Corey. That's a great example of playfulness that doesn't fall within the traditional parameters of play. But like Julie said in the chat, many parents do not find it intrinsic to be playful, and there are a lot of reasons for that. So what strategies do you use to support play and playful interactions with families? Type in chat the strategies that you use in your interactions with families to support play. Demonstrate ways to use household items for play, right? It's not restricted to toys. Modeling, absolutely. Observation is key. Find out what they do, just like the dad in the story. Understand how the family interacts with each other. Follow the child's natural motivation. Body play. Modeling. Commenting on the joy they produce in their child, right? Giving those affirmations to parents. A small, brief activity at first. Let the child lead because, right, children are intrinsically maybe more joyful without all the adult stress that the parents might be holding. These are all great strategies for supporting play. Okay, awesome. So these are all strategies we can use to support play with families. Full disclosure, I know as a parent, I always found myself bored when attempting to play with my girls. Their early play schematics were unclear to me, and I always seemed to play wrong by their standards. Oftentimes, families report feeling silly singing songs with their children or ill-equipped to engage in reciprocal play with toddlers. Like Julie said, it's not intrinsic for everyone, which makes sense, right? Considering what we know about play, children this age are engaging in more parallel play, not yet ready for cooperative play. While parallel play doesn't come naturally to adults, remember, playfulness absolutely can. We can encourage playfulness in families by doing exactly the things you've noted, by modeling playful interactions without toys or other materials, or using blankets or clothes or our own hands for peekaboo and other silly games, and most importantly, by supporting families in relaxing and enjoying their child. Playful intervention, Lori says. Exactly. Stressed caregivers are not playful caregivers, which is exactly what Julie was saying. So let's give lots of encouragement to families to engage in natural, loving interactions, more so than an emphasis on floor play that might feel structured and inhibiting for families. Does that make sense? So let's go on to our third and final bias for the day. How many of you believe that it's important for children to have schedules? Raise your hand if you believe consistent schedules are important for children. Yes, we love schedules. We think schedules of some kind are important for children. What strategies do we use? Since we all believe consistent schedules are important, what strategies do you use to support families in implementing schedules of some kind? How do you help families with this? Type in chat. Did I say that? I'm sorry. Type in chat. Asking what they do every day that is important to them. Picture schedules, find out their rhythms, have them define it, social stories. Do an RBI, a routine-based interview. Do all families want schedules? That's a great question, Corey. Asking them to think about what has been successful in the past, what are the natural activities within their routines that we can build on to maximize. What's most difficult? Couldn't always keep one. That's the challenge, right? Because there's lots of ways in which we feel committed to a schedule, and then when we can't achieve it, we fall off that bandwagon. Find out what's most difficult. I like that question. What factors and influence impact the schedule? What are all the different pieces that are pulling at the family's day? Typically, our beliefs about schedules are rooted in our personal biases and may also be confused by our belief in routine. Let's unpack these two ideas somewhat separately. Schedules are about the time of day something occurs. When my girls were little, we took a nap every day at 1 o'clock. We were always home at 1 o'clock. It was nap time, and that was our schedule. and I never broke it. The routine of nap time, on the other hand, in my family was diaper change, then story time, then snuggles, then passies and loveys, and then in their beds. In that order, every day. Because I was in my doctoral program when my girls were little, I worked while they slept. So our bedtime schedule was 7 o'clock, and the routine was similar, albeit a little bit longer, as nap time. For my family, that early bedtime allowed me to work after they were in bed and allowed the girls to get a full night's sleep with an early wake up to start our day. Conversely, some families have the exact opposite schedule, work second shift, or have different time of the day that they spend together. One of my closest friends had a baby 6 days after I did, and her schedule was about exactly 6 hours off from mine because her husband played basketball in the NBA and they went to games in the evening and she took the kids with her. So they were out later and they slept later in the morning. That's a shift in scheduling from my family, but not for better or for worse. It's just what works for every individual family. We can't put our 8 to 5 expectations on all families. The time families spend together is valuable, so our strategies for supporting schedules should honor families. So we have to consider, what are the unique circumstances for this family, and in what ways can we make adaptations for their success? What isn't working? I love that question. What isn't working, and in what ways can we support helping you feel more successful? We all hold biases about what is best for young children and their families. The challenge is to put away our judgment, or our J, as Corey calls it. For those of you who had her in your, as a supervisor, you've heard this term, and push ourselves to see the unique circumstances and perspectives of each family with whom we have the honor to interact. All of these ideas are important. We all agree, but causing us to pause regarding individualized needs and priorities of each family and think more broadly about how to get at our ultimate goal, which is maximizing opportunities for engagement and full participation of young children within their families. So what other professional biases do we hold that we missed today? What are some other professional beliefs that we believe in related to children and families that we didn't talk about?
You know, Jen, as people are typing in chat, I'm anxious to see. Jen and I often talk about these kinds of things, and we both sort of sheepishly say, okay, here's one of my biases. I know that I feel this when I see this, and how do I kind of manage that? So I'm wondering, as you guys type in chat, where are those places where you see parents or caregivers interacting that in your head you think, oh, if they could only try it like this?
One of the great examples that Corey and I often talk about is that experience that maybe you have had as well when you are at Target or Walmart at 9 o'clock at night grabbing something for your kids for school for tomorrow or work or last minute something, and you see that baby in the store and you hear the baby fussing. For me, my first instinct is, oh, a little guy should be at home in bed. And I have to stop myself and think, I have no idea what that child's schedule and routines are. He might have just woken up from a nap, and they might have a very different reality than I do. And it's judgmental and not helpful for me to approach it in that way. And I have become more conscious of that over time and trying to really be considerate of those experiences, because when I think like that, I am reducing my family-centered practices lens, right? So I have to continuously push myself in that way. And Julie, you're saying the same thing, kids staying awake late and getting up late. I think that's really challenging. So I've been writing down some of the ideas that y'all are putting in, and I think that there's a lot to unpack here. Sue says the use of pacifiers, which isn't something I had thought about, but I think you're exactly right. The use of pacifiers is for sure something that we hold beliefs about related to development, about speech and language development, oral, motor, social, and what ways do we build strategies, or in what ways do we promote that belief or that bias with families? Co-sleeping, or having everyone sleep in the same room. Do we have biases about that? I would love to hear from you about that. How do you have beliefs about where children sleep and the ways in which we emphasize that with families? What strategies do you use to talk to families about where children sleep? Can you type in chat for me? That's interesting, don't you think, Corey?
I do. I'm actually seeing lots of different comments about that one, lots of different biases, and as I'm looking at them, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I see that one, I've thought that one, yep, absolutely.
I remember, I see this one from Harrisonburg too while I'm waiting for y'all to talk about sleep strategies. The snacking and grazing thing. I remember when Breck and Maylee were little thinking that those Puffs and Cheerios must be made of air, because they seem to just always be eating them or wanting them. And I was concerned about that too as a parent. I thought, I'm trying to feed them meals. I'm not sure how this translates into this constant need to have a snack trap. Yes, I can repeat the question about sleep strategies. One of the biases that Fairfax noted was co-sleeping, or having everyone sleep in the same room. I wondered about your strategies for, so I believe that the bias there is that children should sleep in their own bed. We have a belief that children should sleep in their own bed. And I wondered what strategies you're using to encourage that, or to support families in their sleep strategies. In what ways do we support families if they're offering sleep as a struggle? Safe sleep material? Absolutely. I'm working on a project now. The infant mortality rate here in St. Louis is amongst the highest in the country, and the first step is safe sleep. So I can certainly see the emphasis there for safety purposes. Are there other ways in which you support families in that bias about where children should sleep? If the family is comfortable, right? So that goes back to the earlier question about whether or not we identify it as a concern versus if the family feels like it's a concern, right? When is a belief a bias, and when is it a recommended safety practice? It's a great question.
Jen, I don't know if you see, I love Brandy's comment. She says, I think there are times when families may not have space or options to have a child sleep in another room. I think that, again, really understanding what a priority or what is important for that family.
And then considering our own bias related to the privilege that we make the assumption, right, that there would be another space for a child to sleep. Bedtime routines. So that gets us back to the idea of schedules and routines to see if it's helping with sleeping. Are people sleeping? Is that an area of concern? And certainly it relates to a cultural bias, right? So when we think about the belief or the bias versus the safety practice, there are many cultures that believe that co-sleeping is the right way and the only way. So that also seems like a relevant thing to incorporate in our beliefs. Is the situation causing the family stress, or are they happy with the arrangement? And we also have to always be conscientious of the fact that they disclose that to us, right? And the honor in someone revealing those things. I know when my daughter was I have twins, and when my youngest was little, she received early intervention. And I remember, and I've talked to Corey about this, the things I didn't tell our early interventionists about how we were managing as a family. So when families do disclose that, how do we honor that without demonstrating that bias? Offering children candy, I think that's an interesting one. There's also this, I think somebody said really early on about screen time, and we've talked about that as well, about how we feel about screen time for young children and the ways in which families use screen time. There are some other, there are a lot of people thinking about screen time. In what ways do you support families in using or limiting? What is your bias about screen time? Can you give me in the chat your bias about screen time? What is your bias, Julie? How do you feel about it? That toddlers should not have access to screens? How do we enrich it? Too much screen time is not good for kids, okay? So how do we support families in that? Takes time away from interaction, more parent interaction. I love this question. If there is research against something, is that considered a bias? It actually is, because we're thinking more broadly now about the ways in which we can use what a family is doing to then coach them toward those best practices. So if we come in and say, well, the research doesn't support co-sleeping, there's no evidence that that's going to be enough to change a family's practice. So for screen time, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics has long since had limitations for screen time for toddlers, right? However, we know that oftentimes parents are using devices to support children through waiting for the pediatrician or distracting them while they're waiting for their food to be served at a restaurant, or all of those things. And so how can we use those experiences rather than saying, please turn off the device? How can we say, okay, if they're going to do this, in what ways can we support that interaction? So parents interacting with the child while the child is playing a game or watching a video. In what ways can we coach that? Might be a way of supporting Lori says the same thing, interact with the baby on screen and limit it, right? So it's about kind of doing both of those things. But it's for sure a bias, and it's something that we might have a future Talks on Tuesday to address, right? The bias of potty training is very real as well.
Jen, I see one from Colleen that's interesting. She said that she has a personal bias that the curtains or the shades should be up in a house. And
those dark rooms.
Certainly we've all been in those really dark rooms where we're like, oh, if we could just get some light in here.
So what might be the motivation of the family to keep the curtains drawn? Why might the family be keeping those curtains closed? Depression, safety, less distraction, right? Keeping the room warm or cool depending, the neighbors, right? It's a habit for sure. And that others cannot see in. It's a family tradition. That's certainly one of those biases that could be rooted in things that we may not understand from the family's perspective. I know there are areas where I live now that I go and the families keep the windows closed for safety reasons, which is very different than something I could relate to in my own personal life, but I try to honor it. I also am a person who doesn't like overhead light, and so I tend to be in darker spaces, I think, so maybe I have more tolerance for it. I can appreciate that bias for sure. When we generally think of biases, we often think of beliefs we need to overcome, of beliefs that are limiting our experiences with people who are different for us. Today we talked about biases in a different way. Not that we need to necessarily overcome, but just that we need to broaden. In implementing truly family-centered practice, we have to move past our beliefs about things like books and play and schedules, for example, and truly engage families in unique and individualized support. We hold these and others that you just mentioned, and I appreciate so much your participation in the conversation. We hold these things dear, and for good reasons. We have strong beliefs about these things. However, there are many, many varied ways to achieve the same outcomes, the outcomes we want for all of the children we are honored to work with. It's our responsibility to promote the practices that families are already using and coach them in making them even more powerful for their little ones. If we approach every family with the same script of reading books, engaging in floor play, and implementing schedules, are we truly family-centered? Or could we challenge ourselves to broaden our lens, ask families what they're currently doing, like each of you recommended, and what they're comfortable with, like many of you said, so we can tailor our coaching for each family's unique experience. Acknowledge your professional biases. Own them. It's okay. It's exciting to be able to say it is okay for you to have a bias and to own it. You have those biases with good evidence and reasoning. Like many of you said, there's research to support some of the things that we believe, and that's important. But now it's time to find multiple routes to your desired destination with families. You have your way. I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it just does not exist. Thank you so much for being with me today and for your robust conversation. I appreciate your participation so much. I would like to, go ahead, Corey, what were you going to say?
I was just going to, as we're wrapping up, I see that we have just a few more minutes. I am wondering, based on our conversation of the biases we identified and then those that you indicated that you struggled, what is one strategy you might take and think about to kind of, what we do jokingly say, put away your J or your judgment? What is one thing you might want to think about in the next couple of days, particularly about one of the issues that you mentioned or that we discussed today? So if you could type that in chat, that would be great. So Jen, if we can just give them a couple minutes and see what we get from there, that would be wonderful.
I love that. I like this idea that oftentimes folks coming from sunny countries of origin have different ideas about sunlight and protecting your skin and your eyes from sunlight, that sensitivity. Consider what has meaning for the family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how do we build on what has meaning for the family?
So
Think about the alternative ways. Yeah, me too. Thinking about playfulness. Biases and facts with some of these areas, but I will. Kathy, I love that, and I would love to chew on that with you, figuratively, because I think that that is exactly what we want you to leave, thinking about and wrestling with. Thanks, Colleen.
I do think that that's something, Kathy, as you think about, I remember when we have done all this work with coaching, Melissa is such a strong advocate for really knowing and being comfortable in the evidence and the research behind what you say. So kind of coming up with that balance of respecting the family's practices and their routines, but knowing what the research says and being able to articulate that, and then helping to figure out where is the best approach to be able to honor what the family and share that information. And you're right, it is a very fine line. I absolutely agree. It's a constant struggle, constantly. So yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate if you have any more thoughts or if you have questions for Jen, or if this has sparked you to think about where we might want to go next on this topic, please feel free to keep the chat coming. We will be happy to take a look at that. I want to thank my colleague, Jen, for always sharing her expertise so willingly, and I hope everybody has a good day. Please plan to join us for our April Talks on Tuesday, and I have to confess, I can't remember what the topic is, but the date is April 4th. Oh, and I do know the topic. The topic is toddlers and technology, so we might get some of that screen information that we talked about. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great day. Bye-bye.